meeting.
Yeah. So, welcome to this lecture devoted to constitutional imaginaries. My name is Martin Belov, and I'm professor in constitutional and comparative constitutional law, vice dean of the Faculty of Law of the University of Sofia, St. Clement Ochridsky, and I'm also a leader of that strand of the project called Summit EU VASC. That project is funded by the European Recovery and Resilience Fund, and it's part of the Summit project of the University of Sofia. A few words about that project I'm supposed to say at the beginning of each lecture. Actually, my strand is devoted to two main topics: emergency constitutionalism and constitutional polity rights on the one hand, and constitutional imaginaries on the other. And there are several activities which are part of this strand. First of all, I'm organizing three big international conferences. The first one happened in March 2024, and it was devoted to representative democracy in crisis. The book will be published very soon in May with Rutledge. And then the second conference took place in November in Sofia again. It was devoted to the legal imaginaries of crisis and fear. The book will supposedly appear also in 2025. And then there will be a third conference on the 4th of April. So everybody is welcome on 4th of April at the University of Sofia. The title is Constitutional Polity Crisis and Emergency Constitutionalism. Apart from these three books and three conferences, I'm organizing I published a special issue, and part of these special issues I have there are 8 papers. It's a great pleasure that Jiri Priban has written one of the most important among them, and this special issue is published with the Review of Central and East European Law with Brill, and its topic is Constitutional Imaginaries in Central and East Europe. And last but not least, I'm organizing 2 lecture series. The first one concerns emergency constitutionalism, constitutional polity crisis and rule of law in democracy in transition. We have had already 4 public lectures as part of that lecture series. And the second one is entitled, has the same title actually as the lecture today, Constitutional Imaginaries. And this is, in fact, the 6th lecture out of this lecture series. So in general, I have had already 10 public lectures as part of that project. And I'm extremely glad to have here as a special guest today, Professor Jiri Priban, who is, I would say, one of the biggest names in social legal studies, but especially his research is focused on that very challenging, relatively novel, and quite interesting, especially for me and for him, topic, constitutional imaginaries. So Professor Priban has been for long years director of the Institute of Social Legal Studies at the University of Cardiff, UK. And he is currently judge at the Constitutional Court of the Czech Republic. Professor Priban has been also visiting professor or research fellow at a number of academic institutions such as University of Berkeley, New York University, University of New South Wales, Sydney, University of Pretoria, University of San Francisco, European University Institute in Fiesole, Florence. Actually, Fiesole is above Florence, so it's more or less similar. The Royal Flemish Academy of Belgium for Science and the Arts in Brussels. And he was also awarded by this academy the Social Legal Theory and History Book Prize from the Social Legal Studies Association in 2016. What is more important are the books that he has published. Many of them has really opened or channeled the discussion on key topics of contemporary legal semantics, semiotics, and constitutional law. He has published a book, Legal Symbolism, in 2007. Another one, Sovereignty in Post-Sovereign Society in 2015. Then a masterpiece on constitutional imaginaries in 2022, and also a book on dissidents in law. So without much ado, I have the pleasure of giving the floor to Professor Priban for his presentation on constitutional imaginaries. Jiri, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin, and for your introduction, and thank you all who have come virtually or who are there in Sofia in person in this wonderful city. And I'm really grateful to be invited to this series of lectures and conversations, because the concept of constitutional imaginaries is contested, yet it has its tradition in legal theory as much as social theory and philosophy. And today I have a presentation, I have a PowerPoint presentation, which I will be sharing with you in a minute. But the content of my lecture will be a brief summary of how did we arrive at the concept of imaginaries, which is informed by social theory and sociological theory of law. And I will be examining a bit of the meaning of the concept, some imaginaries, most notably the public sphere, but then I will shift my attention from statehood, nationhood, territory, to imaginaries that are beyond this. I will briefly talk about Europe, but my main concern would be with the role of imaginaries in contemporary constitutional populism and constitutional democracy. So I will start sharing the screen with you.
You have to press the green share button and then.
Yeah. Yep. And I think I am, you all can see it now. Yep. Okay. So constitutional imaginaries and the on populism and explosive communities. If we start, we can see that every society constitutes itself by different social systems, but also it constitutes its collective self, which is imagined. It's an interesting paradox in modernity that modern society is always defined by sociologists as functionally differentiated, that different systems operate independently and autonomously, whether we talk about politics, economy, law, education, religion, and science. It's a society which is not one, which is always differentiated into different systems. And yet, at the same time, this society is imagined as one, as something that sociologists define as collective self, or social psychologists. So what is it in imaginaries, or what are imaginaries? I remember a conference at which one of the most distinguished public law professors, who wrote a famous article in Modern Law Review exactly 10 years ago, 2015, Martin Laughlin wrote a now famous essay on the constitutional imagination. Imagination is a well-established concept in philosophy, law, social theory, and we speak of the sociological imagination, and we speak of the legal imagination, James Boyd White, for instance, and we speak of the historical imagination, Collingwood and others. So Loughlin invited legal scholars to think about the constitutional imagination. And some years ago, at a conference, coincidentally in Copenhagen, he said, well, imaginary, it doesn't exist as a concept. It's not English. It's and he was very provocative about it. And this was, I think, 2023, and it was exactly 20 years and more, actually, 25 years since the publication of a famous book and a very important, influential book by Charles Taylor, Modern Social Imaginaries. So who is right, who is wrong when two native speakers, one English, the other Canadian, discuss imagination and imaginaries? We don't have to bother about it. What we are concerned with is what is this process in which a differentiated modern society represents itself as one collectively shared and meaningfully constituted community. A very important move in social life, social understanding. So it is a paradox, functionally differentiated. The society constitutes its societal unity as different, yet also it has symbolic communication of differences as unity. In that respect, my book, which Martin so kindly commented on, is the last part of a trilogy on legal symbolism. It started 2007 with my publication of the book called Legal Symbolism, then and a simple question: how come that some laws attract a very strong symbolic meaning? For instance, the lustration laws or restitution laws. And so, yes, laws have instrumental rationality, but also symbolic rationality. The book that followed was, again, inspired by a simple question, because I was interested how in the second decade of the 21st century, lawyers, politicians, economists, populists increasingly started referring to sovereignty. Obviously, society is post-sovereign in many respects, and yet, even in Europe, transnational, supranational settings of European law, European politics, European economy, the talk increasingly was of sovereignty, divided, shared, yet still sovereignty. So this was the second book. And in the third book, in Constitutional Imaginaries, I thought, well, this is not something which is politically controlled. This is something which is constituted by society, for society, and this semantic paradox of representing the plurality and difference as unity and commonality really drew my attention. So the imaginary self of society is constituted in society by many different ways, law being one way of this. Okay. So very briefly on the difference between philosophy and sociology of imaginaries. Talking of legal symbolism and symbolic forms, it's much part of ancient as well as modern philosophy. And for me, Ernst Cassirer was always one of the most inspiring scholars in this respect. And here is a quote from him that there is a certain type of thinking which we call metaphorical thinking. So it's a final community of function and the human mind and its spiritual creativity. It also has metaphor as an important element of human thinking. So what is fascinating for a sociologist is how close these symbolic forms discussed by Cassirer come to Emil Durkheim's collective representations. So, frankly, we have a phenomenon here, which philosophers discuss in their typical ways, sociologists discuss in their typical ways. Don't forget that Durkheim had training of a philosopher, and it was basically communication of imaginary collective unity, even in complex and functional differentiated society. So when we stop talking about classics of Cassirer, Durkheim, links between philosophy or phenomenology and sociology, we encounter the talk of imaginaries in, again, philosophical and sociological literature. I think we all are familiar with Cornelius Castoriadis, that what is society? A system of significations. So factual answers to the imaginary questions of collective self. This is Castoriadis's notion of society as an imaginary entity. Lefort talks about critical imaginary of democracy, and here sociologists and historians strike again. Benedict Anderson, when he studied his book on nationalism, when he was writing this book, he was talking about imagined communities. Imagined communities has become an intrinsic concept of sociology of nations, of nationalism, and of general sociology. It's interesting how around the same time when Anderson analyzes modern nationalisms and speaks of imagined communities, Zygmunt Bauman, in his textbook of sociology, discusses imaginary communities. What he means is class, nation, gender, those big communities that you cannot experience, but you can imagine. And then comes Taylor. And Taylor, this is from the 1980s to 1990s, and Taylor publishes book Modern Social Imaginaries that changes a lot of things. All right. Very briefly, what are these imaginaries that I try to identify? And I use the theoretical combination of social systems theory and the analytics and genealogy of power, which identifies imaginaries as societal forces. They reconstitute functionally differentiated society as one legitimate polity. So they operationalize values, they give them meaning, and they can be arbitrary and conventional because they are social and historical constructs relative to the semantics and structures of specific systems. But at the same time, they generate our talk of principles and values transcending the different structural and semantic differences in modern society. So this is back to the paradox, and the paradox is always here to be deparadoxified. So what is behind the deparadoxification of imaginaries? It is that they turn society into a community of the ethically meaningful life constituted by shared values and legal rules. It's funny because we know that in all facts point to the impossibility to have integration by values, integration by cultural traditions. We are in post Parsonsian concept of system that culture integrates society. No, it's not. But still, imaginaries are vehicles of our value judgments. Well, now, so this is the first part of the lecture, which takes us which explains how imaginaries have always been here as a problem. Whether we talk about symbolic forms in philosophy, collective or forms of collective representations in sociology, and then in post-war social theory, sociology, and philosophy. Okay, before we start discussing specific imaginaries which are related to constitutional law and politics, let me make a step aside and engage with the second part, introduce the second part of this lecture by stating that society can be imagined in many different ways. But what happens or what has happened in the last 50 years is a rapid process of globalization in Europe, Europeanization. Politicians would now be heavily, or economists would be heavily talking of deglobalization, especially in light of the latest political developments in the United States and elsewhere. But we are sociologists of law and legal philosophers. We can ignore this talk of the day and think in a wider context. And clearly, one of the strongest and most visible changes is how the nation state has transformed and evolved in light of globalization and Europeanization and nationhood, how it changed. So basically, what I want to say before moving on is globalization and Europeanization has its own new imaginaries. If I say that we have new imaginaries, I should also say that there is, for lawyers and political scientists in particular, one imaginary which is very ancient and still very strongly favored in politics, in law. And this is the imaginary of the unity of topos-ethnos-nomos, which means territory, nation, and law. Ever since the ancient Greek polis, this has been described as this is what constitutes a polity. Yeah, that the unity of one people living on one territory under the rule, sovereign rule of laws. Those of you who are interested in ancient Athenian history, you know that this is exactly the speech of Pericles mourning the heroes fallen in the Peloponnesian War. This is the imaginary which was also behind the rise of modern nations and nationalisms and the constitutional democratic state as much as authoritarian, illiberal, even totalitarian state. That the people is looking for its sovereignty, legal constitutional sovereignty, and self-rule on a particular territory. Modern nationalisms are simply unthinkable without this imaginary. Well, this is the imaginary of the nationhood, statehood, and constitutional sovereignty. If you look at the post-1945 history and general process of European integration, it offers a unique opportunity to study how this constitutional imaginary became challenged by new imaginaries beyond structural and semantic limitations of the modern nation state and this unity of topos-ethnos-nomos. Well, even if we see and study transnational European society, we know that, yes, there are new imaginaries, and at the same time, the unity of topos-ethnos-nomos in Europe continues to play its enormous role. Just think of Brexit, just think of the Greek Euro crisis and how the Greek people voted overwhelmingly in a referendum against the austerity measures, only to be told that there will be more austerity because economic and the euro currency doesn't recognize the state or the popular sovereignty in economic matters. Okay, so we know there are some strong constitutional imaginaries behind the nation state, but that transnational, globalized law and politics introduce new imaginaries, and I'll be talking about them. It's history of European integration is based on some classic political expectations. What do we expect from politics? Safety, security, and stability. European integration was to provide exactly this in wake of post-war redevelopment of Western constitutional democracies. At the same time, we can see that the systems of the European Union are developing their own imaginaries. Okay, so we know that the European Union is expected to be socially and morally pluralistic, efficiently and rationally governed, economically prosperous, and sufficiently democratized. This third bullet on this slide is particularly important because it shows, it reveals 4 different systems. Legal or constitutional system of the European Union, administrative system, economic system, and political system. So, imaginary of constitutional pluralism informs the legal system. Imaginary of administrative calculemus, this idea that if you calculate well, if you rationalize well, you administer well, it's an ancient idea. Again, calculemus isn't something which is entirely new. We know it from 18th century, but it is the European Union which takes this administrative and bureaucratic thinking to new levels. Economic prosperity is obviously imaginary, that if we are in one single market, in the common market previously, then we would all become more prosperous. And politics is, well, if you have individual states that are democracies, you want your community, transnational European community, to uphold the same democratic practices and values. So we have now 4 post-national imaginaries informing European constitutional development and society development. Constitutional pluralism, administrative calculemus, economic prosperity, and democratic community. To analyze this relationship between transnational and national imaginaries, we have to return to the classics once again. Hobbes famously states, auctoritas non veritas facit lege. To this, Immanuel Kant says, no, it's veritas, non auctoritas facit lege. And today, or in the last 60 years, Jürgen Habermas, one of the most distinguished German philosophers, developed the concept of the public sphere, the imaginary of the public sphere, and then communicative reason, discourse ethics, as that if you want to have a legitimate system, you go the Kantian way. You have to believe and establish verifications and the system of discourse, which would be free, unconstrained, in which and through social communication, people would realize what is not only right and wrong, but what is true and what is false, and therefore what is legitimate and illegitimate. So for Habermas and his followers, the public sphere, and remember, Habermas wrote the book on the structural transformation of the public sphere when he was 28. So this is, and he's now well into his 90s. So this is a book which really shaped political and ethical thinking and shifted the problem of legitimacy from statehood to society, to the public. Okay, so reason, the power of reason, and here we are back to the function of imaginaries as it's a power. So it provides for authority to any law and the constitution which is based on societal public sphere in which people can reason, persuade through informed, civil, and consensual way. Okay, don't take me for this word. We live in a very different communicative setting, but the idea behind the public sphere imaginary elaborated by Habermas and actually heavily commented on by Charles Taylor is that there is a societal sphere which precedes politics, in which civic virtues lead to the truth and verification as a basis of civil consensus and political consensus and legitimate state power. Not only state. Yeah? So this is where we are. What is this public sphere? It is expected to facilitate free discussion, so you have freedom here. Identify social problems, so you have social policy here, and you translate social problems into political ones. It's highly pluralistic, diverse, conflictual, yet in the public sphere, all these diverse opinions translate into rational judgments and political consensus. So the more participation leads to more legitimacy. Well, we have a problem. And now I'm coming to the third part of my presentation, because after we discussed all these imaginaries that shape modern political and societal world, you have transnational world of constitutional imaginaries beyond this. You believe that through more communication you achieve more legitimacy, and yet what we experience now, and this takes me to more specific context of European politics, is entirely the opposite. You have the rise of populism and the authoritarian rule, and I didn't want, and I specifically refrained from participating in all those conferences on populism, constitutional populism, anti-constitutional populism, authoritarianism, because I thought that what we require is we have to understand populism as in a more general and theoretical context. So yes, what do we experience? Growing public distrust of technocracy and expert knowledge. And yet, technocrats or techno-oligarchs are running the mill. We have growing public anger vis-a-vis growing economic insecurity. But you have growing public anger even in countries experiencing prosperity. Poland would be a good example, because Poland didn't have an economic recession for decades. General failure of anti-majoritarian institutions and their expertise to address issues of social justice and equality. Of course, we all love constitutional review. Constitutional courts are favorites of the liberal discourse, and yet they can be so easily hijacked, and at the same time, they can be so easily distrusted. So populists exploit the framework of constitutional democracy. And well, then the question is, when does populism translate into authoritarianism? You don't have to go far away. Just look across the border, and Hungary would be a good example how you make a constitutional reform, and in one decade you convert working, imperfect, but working constitutional democracy into an authoritarian, illiberal, clientelist state. Big question for Europe. Of course, now it's not only Hungary. Poland is on mend, Slovakia is collapsing, but this is not a political talk. We can come back to it in discussion. I want to share more important theoretical things with you, because when we talk about populism, when we discuss populism, I think we have to step back from politics, and we have to understand that in communication, societal communication, there is a profound difference between doxa and episteme. Doxa is a public opinion. Populists thrive on doxa. Episteme is an expertise, including legal expertise. It's the language of science, of technology, of expertise. And populist reason is not something which the right-wing politicians or extreme right-wing politicians impose on the masses. This is just half-truth, because the other half is that the leftists love talking of the populist reason. Laclau and Mouffe or Ernest Laclau wrote a book on the populist reason, which mobilize the masses. And it's what is interesting in the last decade is how this mobilization of populist doxa is targeting episteme, is targeting expert knowledge. So believe it or not, in Slovakia, there is one very senior politician who believes that we don't have any evidence to claim that the earth is not flat. I'm not joking. This is real. Yeah, you can't imagine it, you can't invent it. It would be a very poor joke, but it's worse than joke. It's reality. We have a president who contemplates whether people should drink bleach to get rid of COVID. Yeah. So this is an outrage of doxa against experts. Well, should experts be always trusted? Economic crisis revealed that experts cannot be trusted on economy. COVID crisis revealed that experts cannot be trusted on epidemics. If you look at the World Health Organization and how their report on COVID, it looks more like written by the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Yes, so it's the collapse of expertise in the public domain fuels the rage of doxa. This is the paradox of democratic politics, and we in every democratic politics you have doxa and episteme working together and clashing with each other. So the paradox is that experts are never unanimous, authoritative, and generally valid. This is the definition, the basic definition of the science is you always have disagreement. However, in politics is the other way around. You always want agreement. The public opinion should come to some consensus. But at the same time, we are a society run by expertise, by episteme, of different systems. So, how to understand our politics of populism in Europe and beyond? I think the concept of imaginaries offers us an interesting reading of this. I believe, and this is the last chapter of my book on constitutional imaginaries, and some critical friends said, well, the book is nice, but we would like to know more on populism, because everybody talks about populism. So this last chapter should be much more expanded. I followed by writing 2 more articles on imaginaries and populism, but here I want to return to the original argument, stating that there is the imaginary of authenticity, which explains the appeal of populism. The public sphere is not warming up necessarily hearts of citizens, but all citizens, they yearn for some warm feelings, we feelings, and they want to know that this is real. This is true. This is us. And so here we are. This is political existence. And communal bonds are shaped around authenticity claims. And this is what makes populism such an attractive stream of politics. Let me quote here Richard Sennett, who stated almost 4 decades ago that community becomes a weapon against society. This is this classic distinction between community and society, Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft. And Sennett says, well, this feeling of warm, close bonds of community that is being destroyed by society, it's as old as modernity. That's why Hegel and later Marx warn against alienation. Yeah? That's what Max Weber calls rationalization process, which involves bureaucratization, and this is what, for instance, Emil Durkheim calls as the difference between organic and mechanic solidarity, and the answer is anomie is the risk. So the imaginary of authentic politics finds its counterpoint in the negative process of alienation, and the category of truth and falsity permeates the system of politics. Okay, so authenticity is another name for truth and honesty, and what we experience with populism is what Zygmunt Bauman 30 years ago described as explosive communities. Yeah, it's interesting how this criticism of identity politics 30 years ago was coming from the left against the right. Eric Hobsbawm, who was basically a member of the Stalin Society in Britain, but one of the finest historians and of his times. And he says, well, this politics of identity and authenticity invoke the promise of a safe haven for those who feel threatened by and alienated from the forces of the endless and seamless processes of modernization, currently taking the form of globalization. Bauman reworks this claim into sociology of explosive communities, and he says, well, yes, religious fanatics, nationalists, all these people who are lured into populist tribalism, they basically try to fill the void of meaning created by globalization. We are back to imaginaries, because imaginaries, the function of imaginaries is to produce the meaningful existence in and unity in functionally differentiated society. So Bauman and explosive communities is the concept that answers our problem with populism and authoritarianism. Is there any response? And I promise I'm coming to the last part of my lecture now, and I'm almost there, because the question is, well, is the only response to retreat to the unity of territory, people, and the law, and cultivate the territory as reasonably shaped democratic process of civic rights and democratic mobilization? No. A transnational European law, politics, society has to and necessarily constitute its own imaginaries. And the European public sphere is exactly that sphere which cannot be shaped by a democratic sovereign and constituent power, but still Stedham, Koopmans, they They reformulate the public sphere imaginary for European context as operating through the public media networks, critically observing citizens and in different countries. And they say, no, there won't be any one single public sphere. There will be many different pluralistic public spheres. So it's European public spheres, as Risa says. It's a constitutional, it's the only counterpoint that Europe has against the authenticity claims of political identity after all. The other one is democracy, which means Europe of democratically operating peoples. Yeah? Forget about federalism, forget about confederation. If you want to deal with European crisis, you have to shape public space and public sphere in a democratic way through different agencies and with the attempt to bridge the gap in legitimacy of European institutions. And this is the way how to create a constitutional imaginary of European demoi, pushing back the expansive power of expert knowledge and conditioning it by the varied procedures of democratic legitimacy. What I mean here, and what is important here, that this is not Europe of expertise. This is where European society shapes its political doxa through this democratization. Yes, it's difficult to fight identity politics at nation-state level, but there are certain developments which show that politics, European politics, which looked almost impossible to change, how fast it can and has to change vis-a-vis elements and politics that we thought was over. Geopolitics, imperial war, invasion, and basically, if I say that Ukraine has changed everything 3 years ago, Donald Trump is only a catalyst of this change of Europe into a territorial power. So after all, Europe is coming back to its territorial protection. Europe is coming back to its democratically shaped community and the protection, security, safety, the first function of political existence. And Europe is knowing what it is and what it's not. It cannot be an authoritarian, expansive empire. It has to be a community of democratically operating and constitutionally limited nations and governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jiri, for this really interesting, inspirational, and profound lecture, which gave a very good overview over the idea of constitutional imaginaries and demonstrated how that concept operates actually within the transnational post-sovereign field of Europe. So I'm not going to misuse my privilege as moderator and convener, but rather give the floor to you, to the audience, to ask questions if you wish, or comment on the lecture. This is your chance. Luis?
Thank you very much. I have no question at all. I'm just thinking about. I would just like to thank you very much, Martin Belov, and also Priban for the magnificent lecture. I've been also interested on this topic, and Just like I was saying, I have no particular question, but there's always a problem. But you both address it as well in your books on the topic that I think has something to do with the semiotic approach in general, which is how to rigorously convey what is at stake from a semiotical point of view without disregarding the material dimension of law itself. Of course, that the semantic dimension can also materialize. There are obviously semiotic approaches outlining this point in particular, but it's always a doubt from my perspective. I would say that in the past years, I don't want to take you too much time, but in the past few years, I have been trying to approach something somehow more or less similar to what this semiotic approach has been doing, but with a very different terminology, using culture in general, using Jack Balkin on the one hand, but on the other hand, Peter Haberle's Verfassungstheorie als Verfassungskultur, trying as well to deal with what would nomos in a general way mean today. Nomos as a culture, but the main problem for me is always try to avoid what ultimately could become an idealist from a phenomenologist or a German idealism tradition point of view, an idealist understanding of law. But it's been a pleasure to hear from you. I'm still learning, and I would just like to point out we will be having here at Coimbra in Portugal the next roundtable on semiotics, and probably I will talk about something related to the visual dimension, the significance and the material reference of constitutionalism. So I will be using what you have been proposing. So I'm very thankful for all of that. And sorry for the confusing comment on the topic, because I'm just thinking out loud. But thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Luis. Oh, sorry, Martin. Yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, Luis. This is most insightful. And if I would love to be there in Coimbra to listen to what's going on in semiotics, in legal semiotics these days, because my research dates back actually, to much older times, and there are fascinating books written by Bernard Jackson, for instance, on legal semiotics, and this is really like 80s, 90s, yeah. And when we talk about legal symbolism, obviously, Thurman Arnold, yeah, this was part of legal realism question. What are all these governmental aspects, legal aspects doing in society? And of course, the function was, yes, it is revealing as much as hiding. So this symbolic government, yeah, that what we would describe as ideology. And if I can add to this, it's interesting how my book started. Yeah, that I, after completing the book on sovereignty in post-sovereign society, I thought, well, I haven't said everything. Yeah, I want to dip into Taylor and modern social imaginaries and rethink some aspects of semantics. Exactly, as you say, semantics, semiotics, and. Then I received an invitation to LSE, where my colleague Jan Komarek was saying, I am working on ideology and imagination. Would you like to come and present a paper at a conference which I'm running? This was 2017, I think. I said, well, I have just published, 2018, I have just published an article on imaginaries in a Journal of Law and Society. So this was early days of my research. And so here you have a fresh publication on constitutional imaginaries. And here is a big project on imagination and utopia. And Jan was saying, well, I'm rereading Karl Mannheim. And I said, of course, it's all about sociology of knowledge. Yeah. So let's get together. We had one conference, we had another conference, and it all ended up with the publication of European Constitutional Imaginaries book edited by Jan last year, which actually brings together so many different thoughts which you mentioned in your comment. Yeah, so it has an element of semantics, semiology, but at the same time materiality. And I was really fascinated when you mentioned this materiality. Yes, it was a hot topic and very popular topic some years ago, material constitutionalism, basically British academic rediscovering Karl Marx, yeah, substructure and superstructure. And of course, it is formulated very differently in systems theory. It's a permanent communication between structures and semantics. This is Luhmann. I finished the lecture without mentioning Luhmann once, yeah. And but this permanent communication between social structures and social semantics is, I think, an answer to also to imaginaries. They function as power. So they have the structural element, but at the same time, they are very much part of the symbolic semantics.
Yeah,
Martin, do you allow me to say something? I don't want to take anybody's time,
you're my guest,
because this is very poignant for me, because I have been insisting in my classes, etc., about this tension between holism and differentiation. Because and for ones who are sensitive, I too was very much influenced by systemic theory, but at the same time, the consequences of adopting something as Luhmann proposes are in some way terrible for law scholars in general. The condemnation to complete normative impotence towards the evolutionary dynamics of society, etc. But on the one hand, we have all those colleagues of mine coming from Links Luhmannianismus who are trying to combine Luhmann, on the other hand, with populist thinking and plebeiist approaches. So the field is very, very interesting. What's fascinating for me, since I discovered your books 2-3 years ago, is the fact that semiotics is in fact a very accomplished, provides a very accomplished grammar to think about this. Not that, like Jiri was saying, not that not other groups of people were trying to use different vocabularies to talk about this. What's interesting for me is precisely what's behind that kind of new curiosity, a new anxiety, which I think has something to do with the fact that there is a saturation of our traditional categories within constitutional law and constitutional theory. That for me is obvious. And that is why even in my doctorate classes, I explore new concepts or traditional concepts that are being reinvented. For instance, the nomos. Why are we looking? The problem is not using nomos, but why are we using these all of the ancient categories? From my point of view, exactly because they allows us to disspecify some of the concepts we already are using, to go back and try to search in a more wider field where ethics and morals and law sometimes appear combined, and then to try to re-specify again what we are talking about in all those themes. But exploring all the dynamics, I think it's very interesting. So, like I was saying, it was a discovery to find out how semiotics can, in fact, give us an overall perspective of what's going on. Even if I think we could also discuss, and obviously you've already faced this, the tension between, just think about the difference between imagination and the imaginary as such. The implications of a Lacanian point of view on the imaginary, and how it is codified very differently when combined with the symbolic, the real, etc. And all the other authors that as well make claims with regards to imagination, but on very different perspectives. Martin Luglin, to give an example, is thinking about something very different when he's talking about constitutional imagination on that regard. But sorry, I was talking too much. Enthused, of course, enthused, but
I think this was a useful comment because it shows the variety of strands that actually relate to these actually imaginary emotional turn in legal sciences, a bit belated, following this turn that occurred decades ago in other social sciences, humanities. And yeah, actually, I strongly believe that we should depart from the rationalist entrapment of modernity and go towards other textures through which constitutionally relevant meaning is signified. And I believe we have to have also a broader understanding of consciousness in general, and constitutional consciousness in particular, right? Because constitutional consciousness is strongly related with all these abundance and mushrooming of concepts such as imagination, imaginaries, imaginary structure of society, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Martin, if I can add to this and to what Luis said, yeah, it's first on Luis, yeah, I always emphasize that I am profoundly influenced by Niklas Luhmann's social systems theory, but I'm not one of Luhmanniacs, yeah, who try to explain everything through the Luhmann's categories. And I think especially plebeian or populist democracy is, Luhmann clearly states, well, the people is a sovereign who can't decide anything. Yeah, and we see it every day in our political reality, and this is important. What Martin said about yes, this rationalistic trap, yeah, that we really have to rethink societal rationality. It's not communicative reason only. It's basically, yes, society has its own reason, its own logic, and the idea that it could be changed by some visionary politics full of imagination, something yeah, that Charles Wright Mills believed that if we have the sociological imagination by Charles Wright Mills is a very interesting book, and one of the first books on sociology which I've ever read. And at the same time, what he says, this is not a sociological treatise. To him, it was political science treatise on how to make politics more legitimate. It is all about power and more legitimate government. So I think we are beyond that. Yeah, we hardly can believe that some social science can save this world. Yeah, no, it cannot. But it's fascinating to see how and study how, and this project is exactly about how crises and imaginaries are always going hand in hand. Yes, so it's materiality and semantics, structure semantics, it's always at interplay.
Right. A friend of mine, a Turkish professor, said that actually the good cuisine and the culture require decadence. So the crises are really fertile soil for mushrooming of imaginaries. Some of them imaginaries of fear, other imaginaries of salvation. We usually don't imagine a lot. We don't use the imaginary side of our consciousness when we are happy and feeling well governed and feeling safe in certain rare periods of history where that feeling is widespread, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I just want to tell the audience that this lecture, together with all other lectures related to constitutional imaginaries or the constitutional crisis and emergency, are posted, and this one will be posted as well on our YouTube channel of the Summit EU Vast project. So you can always watch it again at home or at work. And I'm very much looking forward to future lectures that will happen as part of this lecture series. Do you have any further questions that you want to pose or comments?
Professor, my name is Stefan Kradobrev. I am a law student in the Sofia University. I first want to say that this was very interesting, and I saw some things from different perspectives from this lecture. And my questions are two in particular. And the first one is, who creates those imaginaries? Which is that authority that can thus create them? Is it the theory? Is it the lawmakers? Is it the administration, for example, in the European Union, or someone else? And the second question is, can we say that those imaginaries are used as narratives by the populists and the authoritarians, or by someone else to explain
Very nice
their
questions. Very nice questions.
theories?
Brilliant. What brilliant questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's who creates imaginaries? My answer would be society, and actually social systems. Yeah, it's not individuals. Individuals have visions.
And yet here you are Lumanian.
Yes, absolutely. This is here I go, Lumanian non plus ultra, and it's no, it's society, social systems, and what is important, they cannot, individuals or groups have visions, dreams, projects, images, but imaginaries are a lot more spontaneous. So evolution, they always evolve. This is Lumanian, but also this is Charles Taylor. This is history is speaking, or imaginaries speak through history, and the meaning, this long durée, this long time. Yeah, so they evolve over time. For instance, the idea of that citizens are equal and have equal rights, and the meaning of this, we know it from 18th century. This is all behind the Enlightenment and revolutions, but it's still an open meaning project. So, and we cannot say. I think if people, those who were fighting for desegregation and equal rights, like Martin Luther King, would be really surprised to learn what is meant by racial justice today at many critical race theory courses. Yeah, so you cannot tell in advance, you cannot plan it. It is part of evolution. And so it's not a political, social imaginaries simply are not a political project. But, and this is your second question, which is absolutely brilliant, can imaginaries be used as narratives by populists and other politicians? Of course they can. Of course they are, because populists are members of society like anybody else, and they draw on some imaginaries. And for instance, and it's always at stake, at question, and that's why I like repeating and reciting Ernest Renan's famous quote that the nation is a daily plebiscite. Yeah. So we have the imaginary of nation. And nations are those imagined communities, even across different nations. So what does it mean to be Czech? What does it mean to be Welsh? What does it mean to be Bulgarian or Portuguese? Yeah. And it changes over time. And It's also different in different nations' eyes, so it's very very dynamic in terms of meaning and meaningful, but at the same time it is and that's why it is subject of contestations. And that's why populists say, well, we are this, this, and that. For instance, one reason behind the popularity of populism today is how globalization completely marginalized the problem of state border and security. Yeah? And it's still 20 years ago, if you said that migration is a problem, you would be immediately labeled as a fascist or a racist. Today, if you look around the world, even here, the Labour government, the left-wing government, is toughening up migration rules, and migration has become a general societal problem, very successfully exploited by populists. Yeah, but it's not just a problem for populists. It's a general social problem. The reason I mentioned this problem of migration is exactly because it so well illustrates how populists only jump on some issues of real politics. They use imaginaries and they turn them into narratives which can be very nasty, authoritarian, xenophobic, but there are always real problems behind populist narratives. So it's a political problem, and that's what I try to say in the lecture, that the way how to confront populist narratives, because populism, it's not just nativism, it's the call for authenticity. The response to it is authenticity always is to be negotiated. Who we are is a question, not an answer.
Very nice. Last round of questions or comments.
Professor Belov, Professor Priban. My name is Alexander Savov, law student from Sofia University, and I have one question. What is the role of constitutional imaginaries in the formation of the doctrine of national constitutional identity? Thank you.
Of the national constitutional
Identity.
Identity. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a brilliant question. Identity is shaped by imaginaries. Yeah, and constitutional identity is something which is, I always write from the position of sociological constructivist theory, systems theory. So for me, categories such as identity or existence is always a matter of how we talk about it. But constitutional identity and self-identity is an extremely important outcome of the symbolic function of constitutions, constitutional provisions, legislation, and identity means the possibility to establish values and protect values behind constitutional rules. So to turn it into, the problem of identity is sociological, but the problem of values and principles is very much doctrinal, legal, and dogmatic, and this is where law and politics actually meet. So constitutional identity is this permanent communication between politics and law, which is entrenched in constitutional documents. Look at the preamble, look at the specific articles, and as one American colleague and scholar said, well, as long as the First Amendment still is in force, I wouldn't worry about my country.
Right. That's a very good conclusion. Any further questions or comments? As you can see, we have some very brilliant students here. Not a huge amount of them, but the one that are present are really good.
The questions were very, very interesting. May I say just something? Because I was listening to Jiri, sorry for interrupting. And one of the things I have tried to explore with students, doctoral students, master degree students, is precisely the specificity of constitutionality. I don't use the term constitutionalism as an ideology. It may sound a little bit ontological to talk about constitutionality as an essence. It's not that way, but I've been trying to use different methods, phenomenological approach, to try to distill what is specific of constitutionality. And the semiotic approach is very useful in this regard, because some of the things don't make entire sense when we're talking about law or the juristic approach to constitutionalism. But at the same time, constitutionalism is not a political question, exclusively a political question. And so it's difficult, and using the Lomanian approach gives us some support for that, the accopulation between politics and law. But I think it's more than that. I think that there is indeed a specific meaning, a specific intentionality when we talk about constitutionality, what it means socially. And I think that that's a very, very interesting point. But my only point was this. I was listening to Jiri. Whether you put the struggle for hegemony as a cultural dimension, because is it at the level of political projects? A political project can become hegemonic, or can we dispute hegemonically an imaginary, a social imaginary, even if it is produced systemically? Because in fact, Luhmann in this regard is amazing. I agree with you. Sometimes I say that it's the analytics of Luhmann is so sophisticated, it's so convincing, that sometimes we mistake theory for reality. We start believing that he's describing reality as it is. But in fact, in one of the Festschriften for Luhmann, I think they shows a magnificent title, Lob der Theorie. He's the theoretician by definition, from my point of view, because it's almost performative. We start believing that reality works out that way, in fact. But what's your stand on that point, on hegemony? Because it's not just a question of infrastructure, superstructure. It's more than that. It's somehow in between projects, imaginaries, ideology.
Yeah. We had endless discussions with Paul Blocker, who is a brilliant scholar in of constitutional populism, but also of legal symbolism and constitutionality. I really like your distinction between constitutionalism and constitutionality, because constitutionality, it's we have to respond to it by sociology or sociological perspective. That's why I like Gunther Teubner's notion of societal constitutions. I elaborated critically, yet with strong admiration, because he liberated, Teubner via Luhmann liberated constitutional theory from juridical limitations of our understanding of constitutions. And if I understand you well, your take on constitutionality is much broader than the ideology of constitutionalism. Mm-hmm. That's why I am quite reluctant to engage in this Gramscian, and that's why that's my discussion with Paul, that the Gramscian concept of hegemony, because it's a bit fuzzy to me. Yeah, so it's it doesn't have Luhmannian precision. Yeah, that the precision in terms of distinctions that we can. Yeah, hegemony can swallow everything, almost like ideology. Although I know it's much more subtle and much more related to culture and yeah, power through culture. Yeah, I agree with you on this societal understanding of constitutionality and taking the phenomenological perspective, because yes, this is what helps us to understand law beyond law. Yeah, so this is really a sociology of law classics that you cannot have, and that's why the subtitle of Constitutional Imaginaries is a theory of European societal constitutionalism. That it's not just law which constitutes European society; it's economy, it's administration, it's politics. So it's much larger.
Thank you.
Nice. So if you allow me, I would like to express again my gratitude to Jiri Priban for this wonderful lecture. I'm very glad that you joined the discussion. Thanks to Luis and to the colleagues who are students. Yeah, stay tuned for future events that I'm going to organize, and let's stay in touch related in regard to these rather interesting topics. I'm absolutely convinced that this approach has a huge epistemic potential that is still on the rise at the moment, and that will eventually help us understand constitutions as non-holistic, narrative-based, contextual projects beyond the rationalist entrapment of modernity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Bye. And hope to see you soon again. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for all.